Welcome back to this afternoon session here on day 2 of the EuropaCamp. Delighted to welcome you back here for a very pertinent, very timely discussion, this time on trying to find Europe's identity. And it comes at a time, of course, where Europe's identity is very much needed, perhaps more crucial than ever. Solidarity, European togetherness, European public sphere. What does Europe mean? Is there a European feeling? Is there a European identity, especially in times like these where Europe is very much challenged? The notion of Europe is very much challenged. And I'm very much delighted to hear from my distinguished, esteemed panelists in just a moment. To my immediate right, he's the managing director of ARTE Deutschland, which is, of course, also our media partner here, our partner of the EuropaCamp. Wolfgang Bergmann is with us. Lovely to have you with us, Wolfgang. We also have with us, I'm delighted to welcome the director of the Einstein Forum, Susan Neiman, is with us here today. And last but certainly not least, delighted to welcome Erik Kessels, who's an artist, curator, and communication designer based in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. And we will hear from Erik in just a moment. He will kick it off with a keynote, giving us some food for thought, which of course we will then take upon and feed into the discussion. But before we do, the Vice President for Values and Transparency of the European Commission, Věra, Jourová, she was kind enough to send a brief video statement, brief video message for this very particular occasion and this panel. And of course, we will be delighted to hear from her and see what she has to say about this very timely issue of Europe's identity. Let's have a look.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have been asked to say a few words about Europe's identity. Polish philosopher Zygmunt Bauman wrote in his book, Europe, an Unfinished Adventure, the following: "Tell me what your values are, and I will tell you what your identity is." Democracy, rule of law, and fundamental rights are our core values. They are codified in Article 2 of the treaty. They are reflected in all policies, be it green or digital. For Europe, these core values are really something that defines us in the positive way. Ultimately, we are a group based on the respect of those values. We are not bound by the will of a dictator. We are together because we share these values. That is why we need to protect them. We need institutions that guarantee the separation of powers, that provide checks and balances. We need independent media, which are the watchdogs of democracies. As often in life, you get to appreciate the value of something when it is already gone. So take it from someone who grew up in communist Czechoslovakia without free and fair elections, without equality before the law, without independent judges, and with state media broadcasting the propaganda of the ruling party. And we see today how much democratic values are under threat. Putin wants to put back an iron curtain in the heart of Europe. He does not want Ukraine to decide about its own future. He does not want Ukraine to choose freedom and democracy. The European Union stands with a free and independent Ukraine, and we call on Putin to end this atrocious war. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Věra Jourová, Vice President for Values and Transparency at the European Commission, for her powerful words. And indeed, she picked up on a lot of subject matters and a lot of topics and concerns that we've been discussing now for the past 24 hours at a time when there is war in the heart of Europe. What does it mean to be European? What do European values really stand for when they are tested at a very critical juncture in time? Before we dive into a discussion, it's my great pleasure now to yield the floor to the internationally renowned Dutch artist, curator and communication designer Erik Kessels. Erik, very much delighted to hear from you. A keynote remark, a little food for thought, which I'm very much looking forward to. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm in the next 30 minutes, I will show you how my search is also for what kind of identity Europe has. I will do this on the basis of some works that I made, and you know, maybe first introduce myself. I started my own company 25 years ago in Amsterdam. It's called Kessels Kramer. It's me on the left, if you don't recognize me anymore. Yeah, I think another thing, as I said, I live in Amsterdam, so we work in a church in Amsterdam. I mean, there's a lot of churches for sale in Amsterdam because people don't go to church anymore. So this is our work space, but yeah, it's also quite good that you can tell your parents that you go to church every day, so that helps a lot. Yeah, just to show you some works that I did commercially, that shows also the irony that I sometimes work with. So this is for the Italian jeans brand Diesel. You know, save yourself. So people that want to stay younger and younger, and you can do that by, for instance, drinking your own urine. Yeah, this was for the Berlin Marathon for Nike, and I decided to look for the oldest runner on the running list, and he was called Heinrich Blümchen, and he lived in Erfurt, and for 3 years we made him the anchorman of the Berlin Marathon. Mostly, of course, this is done by the more, you know, very well-known athletes. But in this case, it was quite nice to use him and completely look the other way. After 3 years, he was not so happy because he always came in 20 minutes late. So because he was stopped by radio and television, but still it was quite a good thing. Yeah, I also did the theme for the city of Amsterdam, I Amsterdam, and yeah, this was quite popular, so popular in the way that a lot of other cities also copied this. So instead of I Amsterdam, this was in Lyon, only Lyon, or we are Ramallah, or I am Ioun. So yeah, I have like 25 copies of the I Amsterdam sculpture that stands all over. Yeah, next is just a film for a Dutch radio station, and this is also to show what you can. Yeah, how, I mean, advertising is always full of cliches and stereotypes, but in a way, I kind of hate advertising. I work already for 25 years in it, but. Yeah, the good thing is that it's quite easy to break these cliches and stereotypes. So this was for a radio station during the World Cup of soccer. Yeah, the animal rights organization was not very happy with this. They actually demanded us to that we would make another film to show that the dog was still alive. And I mean, we thought first that they would make a joke, that they were making a joke, but no, they really sent emails and they called, and so yeah, then we thought like, okay, if you really want it, then you can get it. So we made another film. The next event was the Tour de France in France, of course. And so we brought back the dog, the same dog, and even the same owner. Yeah, then we never heard back from them anymore. It was totally radio silence. Yeah, I think this is also important, talking about, I mean, we are now, of course, we just have 2 years of a pandemic. There's a war going on now, and a lot of these, in these periods, I mean, creativity is often not at its best, of course, because also people are sometimes afraid, and that's not a good starting point for creativity. But I think, especially in these times, it's very critical to be creative, and also, you know, in that way you can maybe change certain systems or also find new innovations, but I think that's quite important. Yeah, so one other thing which I think is one of the most extreme campaigns I ever did is for this hotel in Amsterdam. It's a budget hotel, and I mean, the hotel was our first ever client, but when I went there the next day, it was like really the biggest shithole I saw in my life. There we had to do something for them, and yeah, so we thought, like, what can you do? Because everything you would tell about this hotel is like a big lie. So in the end we thought maybe honesty is their only luxury. So we were very honest with the campaign we did. So we had said, like, now a bed in every room, now even more rooms without a window, now a door in every room, now even more dog shit in the main entrance, and this was really very honest, you know, like, and even in the hotel itself, on the bed, this is how the bed looks. It still looks like this. So there was this A3 cardboard card, and when you had scissors on you, you can cut out all these kind of luxury items and really pimp up your room, you know, like very make it worth staying there. And this was already working very, very well. They first had 60,000 overnights. So after 1 year doing this, they already had 80,000 overnights. So the next year we had a very kind of luxurious campaign, because there was a good atmosphere in the hotel. So yeah, I stole this 5-star hotel image, and it has a lot of these stars on there. And then on the right-hand bottom it says not included. So really there's nothing in this image that is in the hotel. Yeah. Yeah, another work I think is quite good. I mean, sometimes when there's a problem and a client comes with a problem, mostly everybody thinks we have to solve the problem, but what we always do also is to look that we can make maybe the problem even worse. You know, so this was a school in the center of Holland, and they had a lot of problem with garbage on the campus. There were 15,000 students there. So on these garbage bins, we just put text on there, throwing away garbage in the garbage bin. How difficult can that be? And then we made it very difficult. So we had like 7 of these permanent installations where you really had to do your best to throw it away. And really kind of here you have to lift it with 3 people, and also this one, you know, like, but it was, it solved the problem immediately, you know, like, because the student thought, like, if they approach us like this, then we have to go with them, of course. Yeah, another, this is for a hotel, for a museum in Düsseldorf, just to show how you can change an identity that is also stuck in that sense. So especially in musea, there's a lot of fixed things and not a lot of humor. So in this, yeah, we try to change things in the museum. So everybody was wearing a white sweater, but then everybody was mixed. So the director had the sweater of the security of the curator, so you didn't know who was who. Also on these kind of very standard seats, it says like Vater, Mutter, Kind, Tierfreund. So yeah, you can just decide where you sit. This is a sign in the museum saying Ecke. So yeah, it's quite good that you know that there's a corner in the museum. Also here it is the locker area. So in the bottom it says Schlechte Laune, so you can lock up your bad mood. Here there's a wardrobe, bitte keine Hosen. This is the things at the entrance, Spenden and Regenschirme, so you can decide where to put it in. Room for rent, I mean for a long time not occupied. This is the alarm system constantly flickering. This is the, yeah, quite obvious. And the highest point in the museum, and this is the toilet. So yeah, it's just very simple. They can change quite quickly, but it's just to keep things moving. Yeah, I think also, I mean, I call this like the virus called creativity and spread it, because especially now I mean, as creatives and innovators, yeah, we should really do something and push the creativity. Yeah, like this is more some autonomous work that I did. It is called 24 hours in photo. So what I did, I mean, I'm quite fascinated with the amount of images we live every day. So what I did here, I downloaded 24 hours of images from Flickr, from this photo sharing site. And in total, they were 950,000 images after 24 hours download. Everything that was newly uploaded, and then they were all printed and thrown into a museum, and people could like lie in them, pick them up, and yeah, that's shown also in different places. This was in a church in Switzerland. The priest was not so happy, but he had more visitors than normal. Yeah, and some more works that are also more reactionary. This event I organized in Amsterdam called Photo Pleasure Palace. So it's like a kind of an event where there's 7 attractions where you have to buy tickets for. And one of them was called Jump Trump. And this is like 4 years ago, I think. And people could climb up the stairs and then really jump from a certain height and then jump in his face and really trash him in the face. And yeah, like 20,000 people did that over a weekend, so that was quite nice. And another kind of comparable was in Prague, an exhibition that I did called Welcome to Hard Times, the World Problems Workout. So I had like a big museum space, and then I made a gym into the museum. Also because at the moment people are more concerned about their body than that they are about things that are going on in the world. So this was the exhibition. At the opening there was like running machines. Opposite there were all kinds of videos with an attack that would happen in 20 minutes. So on the right there's the Bataclan and the boulevard in Nice, and you would run there for 20 minutes and then it would stop and loop again, so you would not see the attack in a way. Another thing is this boxing ring, which is yes, kind of supported by all these companies and countries that have bribes with each other, that are fighting with each other, and where there's corruption. So then the visitors of the exhibition can really yeah, work out there, and they have to decide us or them to wear which glove they wear. And yeah, another thing is a wall, climbing wall, 10 meters high, with all these, you know, on the infographics at the bottom, there are all these conflict areas of countries that built a war to separate the two countries. And so then, yeah, you can read about it and then climb on this wall and reach that point. Yeah, and then there's these boxing bags that you can also use with dictators on there. Yeah, then I like to yeah, talk about another work I did. to define what kind of the identity of Europe would be. And this is more a, yeah, like it's not a real project that happened, but it's more like a research, like what would happen if a country doesn't have a fixed identity, but has like many identities. So of course we see that in Europe that Germany, France, England, and I mean they have quite fixed identities, but a country, for instance, like Belgium has a lot of different identities. And so yeah, this work is called Welcome to Identity Land, and this is just to see what would happen if there would be a country with multiple identities. So in a way, in that country, a euro coin would not have like a person on there of the country itself, but would be maybe a mirror, so that you can kind of mirror yourself in that coin, and when you hold it, you see yourself in the coin. Another thing that it would be, the flag of Identity Land would be transparent, so it would adapt itself to any background. Then the souvenir from Identity Land could be that, I mean, we buy all this cheap stuff from countries when we visit them, but in a way, like if you visit a place and you take a little stone under your shoe and bring that home, that's also kind of a souvenir. Yeah, then the anthem of Identity Land is all anthems all put on top of each other. Something like this. Yeah, and then the yeah, like the stamp on the passport of Identity Land is then that the horizon is the border, and there's also a little film that we made to show like almost a sunset that you can travel with. Very unnecessary work, but. Yeah. It's a very long film because it's endless how it. Yeah, and then another idea would be that if in Identity Land two teams play to each other, there's 22 players, but they all wear different jerseys. So it's like a total chaos, this game. And we really played it 2 times 45 minutes. And yeah, quite an eclectic game. Nobody will ever know who won or who lost, but yeah, this is like a whole, I think this is the whole film, but yeah, this is how it kicks off, and people don't know where to play the ball, and okay, then this is a work that I'm doing at the moment, so it's more work in progress and not finished yet. So this is an idea to make a European archive. I do this with a friend together, and yeah, the idea is to go with a golden truck through Europe and try to find yeah, the collective memory of Europe's collective memory, because I think at the moment, and for many years already, people are migrating throughout Europe, but objects are also migrating. So, I mean, yeah, it will not take very long anymore until, you know, every country has totally mixed objects. And we, in this case, are looking for, so we go to flea markets in European countries and we make an archive in this truck and find specific items that are kind of yeah, very specific for that country with a certain story to it. So, and that would be then exhibited in and outside of the truck, these archives. So, for instance, this is stuff we already found. This is like a kitchen pan sculpture reassembling a house that we bought in Belgium. Also shows a little bit the Dadaistic nature of Belgium. These are tools that are found in the canal in Amsterdam. So it's like these rusty tools that are on the bottom there. This is like a frying pan I found in Romania, so you can fry an egg and hold Jesus. It's quite bizarre. Yeah, this is like these are a lot of vinyls, but then Sadly enough, the artist has been cut out. Just so one big mistake. Yeah, like a set of false teeth from Romania. And this is like a scrapbook from Bulgaria of somebody who's really into guns. And two, like a female shoes from Lithuania with newspapers inside. And two frogs holding an ashtray from Estonia. Yeah. So this is still in progress. We travel and we buy these objects. And yeah, you can find them on EuropaCamp.eu, especially at the moment, at the stage we are now. Yeah, then a short thing on I think to be very creative, you also, I mean, at the moment we live with a lot of very perfect programs we have. The phones, the cameras on our phones are perfect. The computer programs, the applications, they're all perfect. But this perfection is not really a good starting point for a new idea. I think that nowadays you really have to make a mistake in your thinking process or in your idea process to come up with new ideas. And so I did this book where that advises you really how to fuck up kind of successfully. And yeah, I really love to look at these things, because sometimes, in the kitchen, in somebody's kitchen, you see this small mistake, and it's quite funny. But also, like on a big scale, you see like big fuck-ups that are, I mean, there's a 50% chance that this would have been right, but it's still wrong. Also here, how can you do this? It's ridiculous. Yeah, the next one is also very nice because there's a person who is designing playgrounds for children, but he's not really into children. Because look at this, he's just like, you have to put your children in. But this is a real situation, there's this one, the graveyard. This is an Amsterdam graveyard. They put like a garbage bin next to a grave, almost visually similar. Yeah, here there's a kind of a clear example how to do it. Balconies. And then there is, of course, also disabled toilets. I mean, they always block them. They don't want anybody to get in there. But in a normal toilet, they want as many people as possible in. There's no privacy anymore. Look at who designed this. It's bizarre. There's another disabled toilet. It's really, if you're not disabled and you go in here, then there's a big chance you get disabled. This one also looks very clean, but you think there's nothing wrong, but then if you look very clearly, it will be a gigantic mess soon. And this one is my favorite because you can take a piss, you wash your hands, you wash your dick, there's a little towel to clean everything off, it's a fantastic design in a way. So for me, this is really like nice to get inspired. Yeah, I can look for a long time at this, but anyway. Yeah, then this is also a little bit of a reference to a war, but a different kind of war. And it's quite a shit part. I don't know how you take this, but I did this book called Shit, and because at one point on German eBay, I found like this image of a soldier in the Second World War taking a shit, just in the field, and being photographed by another German soldier. And I thought, like, this is bizarre, because they had a camera and they are. But they are taking pictures of each other. So what I did for the next 3 months, I was looking and looking to find more pictures of soldiers, German soldiers in the Second World War, taking a shit. And I found 80 pictures in 2 months. Really. And of course, this is also a very small part of history. Of course, them doing their own business during war, but. Yeah, it's an ironic work, but it's also quite it's quite horrible. But it also humanizes them in that sense. And Yeah, then I did the exhibition. This was in Bolzano. This is in north of Italy, where they speak German. And so this is like a big booth where you can get in, but there's a double door. So you have to go into the tunnel first. You get into the second door, then you come into a very classic white cube gallery, and there's all the pictures there. But when you close the door and when you're in there, then you know why there's the double door, because the smell is unbearable in the place. And yeah, people can only stay there for 5 or 6 seconds, and then they really have to run out. And anyway, I didn't know how you take this, but... Okay, yeah, then last part, still okay? It doesn't smell here, no, that's fine, yeah. Yeah, the last part, I mean, that is also my passion, so, and that's also to raise creativity in how you would really solve things. And that's more about that I love the work of amateurs. And as an artist, I also collect a lot of pictures from amateurs. And I make these books, and they are called In Almost Every Picture. So I made like 18 of them now. And I show you 2 of them. The first, this is the first ever book I made. And I found like on a flea market in Barcelona, I found 400 images of this Spanish woman being photographed from, you know, by her husband for 12 years. And I found them on the market, and I didn't really look at them because it started to rain, so I bought them, I took them home. And at home I kind of edited them, and yeah, I saw that it was like 12 years, and he was really dedicated in photographing her. It was really like almost like a kind of an amateur fashion show, and you know, he was really focused on her, because if you look, you know, there's somebody drowning here, you know, almost dying, and he was just taking pictures of her. And a lot of bathing suits, yeah, it kept on going. It was an unbelievable collection in a way. Here she's having a rose in her mouth. And then when I made the book and I kind of edited them, I found out that the longer he photographed her, towards 10, 11, 12 years, the smaller she became in the frame. You know, so when you go through the book, she goes really like this, you know. So they really took a distance from each other over time. And because the last picture of the book, she's almost hidden into a tree, you know, like... And maybe he had more eye for the surrounding. Maybe she didn't want to be photographed close up anymore. But anyway, I like to kind of philosophize about these. Yeah, I mean, these people made a work of art almost without knowing themselves. And finally, yeah. So I kind of showed this in Barcelona. And because I wanted to know if this woman was still alive and if the husband was still alive, so they picked it up in the news and they call her La Señora X and La Mujer Misteriosa. And in the end, there was a woman coming to the gallery, and she really said that she knew the woman on the pictures. Her name was Josefina Iglesias. And she died 5 years before, and her husband died recently. So that's also why they had no children, and that's why it ended up on the market. Yeah, so I constantly make these things. And the last one I want to show today is also quite a special one, I think. I found this also on Flickr. And this is a woman called Valerie, and the husband is called Fred. And Fred also likes to take pictures of Valerie a lot, like the previous book. But he wants to do that if Valerie is in the water. And in the beginning she had a bathing suit on, but then she had to keep her clothes on, and the clothes became also wet. So it's obviously like a fetish, and it's really like, I mean, it went more bizarre and bizarre over time, you know. She went with all clothes in the water, and, you know, they call it their wet clothes adventure. And yeah, they think when you wear a bathing suit under your clothes, it's kind of a form of cheating. But, you know, they do it every day, you know, like in the fountain at night, it's being flashed, you know, like Fred flashes Valerie. And you know, when it rains, they love it. You know, the more rain, the better. You know, they go on and on. In the garden, in front of their house, there's a lake. In the swimming pool, in the summer, in the winter. You know, it goes on and on. And this one also, it's almost like a modern version of Ophelia. It's beautiful, I think. So I did the book, and then I sent them the first copy of the book, because I asked Fred if he could take a picture of the book with Valerie in the water. And I forgot to tell them that I printed the first couple of books on plastic paper so that it would resist in the water. So Fred sent me this email, and it's really nice from an amateur point of view. He said, like, hello Erik, I've sent a dozen of photos from our afternoon book swim. I hope they meet what is needed for publicity photos. I have Photoshop touched them up for good presentations. I shot well over 100 views, and these are the best. The shoot went well, we were both in the mood. Of course, there was a light overcast as hoped for, and Valerie wanted to know if the book was really to go into the water. I said yes. The book slipped down into the water a little bit at a time, Valerie taking it and herself in deeper as the photos progressed. Eventually, it was fully under. We enjoyed the tantalizing intrigue of it. You know, it's fantastic how they get like really warmed up by this. After the photo sequence, we both swam with the book, looking again at each picture. The water was not seeming to have any effect on it. We must have enjoyed 2 hours in the water with it. I rinsed it off in the house, dried off each page, and placed paper towels between each page. The book seems to have withstood the length of the adventure just fine. Loved the whole business, Fred and Valerie. And these are the pictures, like, yeah, and then this was my favorite one. And then I got an invitation to show the work in a art festival in Switzerland, and this is like Valerie floating in the Lake of Geneva, like 10 by 15 meters. Fred and Valerie were also invited, but they couldn't come because they had another shoot going on. And but then Valerie was all over the town, and they really enjoyed it. They really enjoyed this attention also, because for them, the more people who see this, the better. So this is like a fountain that was made. And then finally, I thought this is over now, but then I recently found this image online, just like this one. It's by Stella McCartney, like a fashion company, and they really copied the cover of the book. So this, I sent this to Fred and Valerie, and I thought maybe they are very pissed off. And this is maybe also to conclude why I think, you know, as a creative and to think about things, you have to be also slightly naive, and you have to do it for the love of it, and only then you can change things. So Fred sent me this email. He said, like, we see the Stella photos. She does look a bit starched, not enjoying the adventure. You know, like he was only. So he said, like, sort of makes one wonder why she would be doing it to start with. You know, and then in the end, he concluded by saying, I would hope she would get satisfaction in eventually taking the whole outfit under. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Erik, thank you so much. I think I speak for all when I say we needed a good laugh in times like these. Thank you so much.
Okay. I hope
for this very light-hearted but very creative approach and display of the variety and diversity of the European public sphere, of European creativity, which you personify, of course. Thank you so much. Indeed, I think in the remaining 40 minutes, you've given us a lot of inspiration to dive into the subject matter now, because of course we are talking about finding Europe's identity, if there is one, and searching for a European public, one that you have displayed so eloquently and humorously just up until now, Wolfgang. ARTE, of course, is, and you said it in your opening remarks yesterday, we are here at the EuropaCamp. ARTE is a EuropaCamp on a day in, day out basis.
I can tell.
For many years now. At a time like this, when we're all preaching and pleading for European cohesion, for European understanding, for European sympathy, for European solidarity, as someone who's at the forefront of creating a European identity, we have many non-Europeans also here in the audience. How would you define a European identity? What is it to be European?
That's the $100 million question. And my answer is quite close to what Erik proposed here. I think the only possibility is to give an individual answer. For me, being a European is an identity of hundreds and millions of different identities, is in a way the contradiction of a closed identity. It is the idea of an open space to live, where freedom comes together with peace, and then let people live. That's basically my understanding of Europe. I have no religious, I have no territorial, I don't have even a political definition of the European identity. It's a way of life.
It's a way of life. There's not one European identity, but many, you say, clearly. We have 500 million people living on this continent, Susan. And if I were to direct the same question to you about, we always hear the term, particularly in the context of war now, European values. Is there such a thing as European values? The Vice President of Vera, Jourová, spoke of European values. Can you attest to that? Can you subscribe?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Europeans make a real mistake in not listening to how non-Europeans view Europe. Beziehungsweise people like me who have chosen to take on European citizenship after a long time. I think Europeans tend, people who are born European, they tend to be a little jaded. They really don't appreciate what has been established in Europe, imperfectly. We can spend all day talking about the ways in which Europe does not realize its own values. But if you look at Europe, not just from the perspective of people wanting to get in, and here I'm not just thinking of Ukrainians, but I'm thinking of refugees from Syria to Senegal, or those of us who are not refugees but have the good fortune to be able to choose where we want to live. You have a very different picture of what Europe means than you do. Yes, of course, there are different identities, and one of the things that means is that Europe values cultural difference, okay? You don't know what it's like to be able to take it for granted that you can go to Amsterdam or Paris or Prague for the weekend unless you live in the United States or in Russia, okay? Where, you know, simply the size of the place means that you don't have the constant opportunity to, you know, even in a superficial way, understand that people live differently with different values. Whereas if you come from one of these countries, where a country I was born in, the United States, only 20% of the population ever has a passport, you tend to assume that your values are the default position, your framework is the default position, and everything else is a deviation from it. Instead of being able to say, okay, in France they do it like this, and here we do it like that, and that's something that can be respected. Another thing that I think Europeans don't take for granted at all is a whole set of social democratic rights, imperfectly, I know, that are lacking in most countries of the world. I just spoke about the possibility to travel to other countries, you know, paid vacation. And paid vacation both for pleasure and for a sense of, you know, one's life doesn't simply consist of working often 2 or 3 jobs simply to pay the rent, but one has the time, and the government considers that you have a right to the time to pay attention to culture, to pay attention to other cultures. All of that Europeans just simply take for granted, and it's absolutely absent in other cultures. as is, sick leave, as is guaranteed education. All of those things are European values. And I was just talking about, we'd rather settle things by, talking than by fighting. Yes, that was the beginning of the EU. But what really does disturb me is the number of Europeans who are simply unable to appreciate what's already been achieved as European values, because you're not going to be able to make progress with those values unless you appreciate that some progress compared to other countries in the world has been made. Or the other category of people you ought to look at, Europe, from their perspective, is the half of Great Britain that did not want Brexit and that is still in mourning about the fact that it happened. So there's just a few thoughts to begin with.
No, very interesting indeed. And it is an insider-outsider perspective, of course, Susan, that you're bringing as an American who adopted not only European citizenship, but also European values and appreciation. Clearly, Erik and Wolfgang, I want to throw this to you, Erik, starting with you. Susan is clearly saying Europeans do not appreciate what they have, in the sense that the peace, the values, the variety, at the end of the benefits that 500 million Europeans are enjoying on a daily basis. There's a queue of people trying to join this club still, even to this day. Yet she's saying, I don't think you, me, us Europeans, we are truly appreciative of what we have. Is that also your understanding? Would you subscribe to what Susan is saying?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when you travel to a lot of other places, then you can have that reference, of course, and then I totally agree. Then you see like how luxurious it is to live in Europe, and to that we are able to move that freely, that we are able to like the freedom that you in many ways enjoy is I think very important, but yeah, I mean, but I think also it is a little bit under threat at the moment. Even, I mean, for instance, in my case, like, also when you look at artists and the freedom that they have, that is also for many reasons a little bit under threat now. That I think that yeah, from my point of view as creatives or as creative, that there should always be you should make like a little bit of a friction so that other people can look different at certain things. And yeah, there's a lot of countries where that is even more under threat. And but yeah, also in Europe that is quite a growing thing at the moment.
Wolfgang, I think there's no denying that, particularly in light of the fact that this continent hit rock bottom 75 years ago, and to see where we are now, post-45 in the year 2022, even though Erik is rightly saying things are under threat, there are direct external threats towards the cohesion and the peace that we've been enjoying on this continent for so long, for more than 7 decades, yet still picking up on what Susan was saying. Do you also feel there's a lack of appreciation for what we have? Have we become complacent? Maybe it's not Jay, have we become complacent? This is a generation, the new generation after all, thankfully had never experienced war, never had to go through such turmoil.
No, I think the Europeans, of course, appreciate the luxury of, and they appreciate the way of living, and they appreciate many of the values you were putting on the table. That's no question. I doubt they're connected to European identity and to Europe, and it is an irony in itself, because we all know. It is in a way connected to the European idea, but it's not an emotional collective connection to Europe. And the idea of a European identity is still something that is felt by the majority of people as something that is top-down and not a bottom-up emotion.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, Susan. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I gotta push back a little bit, because I don't actually think that Europeans appreciate what they've achieved. I don't know do I know a single? I can think of a couple of exceptions, but they stand out for me, of Europeans who genuinely appreciate Europe. What one hears instead is a sense of, it's criticism about all the ways in which Europe does not live up to its values, which is legitimate and reasonable. But I think that if there were a genuine sense of appreciation, you would get the emotional connection, right? I mean, let me just say another word about the sense in which I think Europe is a social democratic framework, even in countries that don't have social democratic governments, as most of us don't. One of the things that I've said a number of times that puzzles people both in the US and in Germany is that Bernie Sanders is far to the right of Angela Merkel. And what that means is he would not dream. I mean, his history and his attitudes and his, sort of general commitments come from the old American left, but his actual program, doesn't even begin to dream of the social programs that Merkel could not, or any other Christian democratic government, could not have imagined doing away with, okay? And that's really an important fact, because what that means is that even among Christian Democrats or the FDP, there's a sense of solidarity, and I agree that it doesn't show up enough in ordinary discourse, but again, I think because it's underappreciated. The idea that if you are hurt by blows of fortune, illness, or all kinds of things that life can throw at you, you are not simply left to your own mercies. The community has a role that it expects to play, and it's expected to pay. In the United States, the people with COVID, and this tended to be, the least paid workers who were in fact essential workers to those of us who got to work at home and didn't have to stock the grocery stores or, carry the packages that we were ordering online. In the United States, because most people don't have the opportunity to take time off when they're sick, you had one of the reasons why COVID spread so badly and so dangerously in the United States is not just that there were people who wouldn't get vaccinated, it's that people simply could not afford to take time off work if they got sick, okay? Because there's no assumption that that's a right. And, it seems to me that if Europeans, by looking at the way things work elsewhere, and again, not just in Nigeria or poorer countries that are not, but wealthier countries, that they would make the move from what you called luxuries to values, and you could develop the kind of emotional, you could realize that there is an emotional identity that gets taken for granted.
And emotions, of course. Wolfgang, go right ahead, and then I go to Erik.
I totally agree. The question is how. The question is how. We are an invention of politicians. We ARTE. It was politicians who said, might be a good idea if Germany and France, after accepting it's not a good idea to go to war with each other, join together and make a cultural program. And they should target a European audience that's written in our constitutional founding act. And then after a while you ask yourself, what is an European audience? Is there an European audience, and how to reach an European audience? for the first 1-2 decades of our existence, we put it aside a little bit because we had enough to do with trying to find our audience in our core countries, Germany and France, because we are paid from Germans and from French people, and this is of course our main audience. And it was, believe me, difficult enough to share a concept, to share a vision, to share a program that reaches people in Germany and France, because we are neighbors since ever, but we are different, very different, and the way we consume media is super different. And by the way, we don't speak the same language. Problem. But then, how to reach a European audience? And then, is there any European audience? And what is the language of a European audience? What is the understanding of a European audience? What is the aesthetics of a European audience? All this is a very interesting question, and it's a typical European problem because. So it's also interesting to hear what somebody who is into ads, because it's the same problem, of course, for companies who want to sell stuff. Do they find a form to address a European consumer audience, or do they target each and every market in their way? It's basically the same problem.
And emotions is, of course, the term that Susan was saying, and you as well, Wolfgang. Erik, we all say we are Europeans, we love the idea of Europe, but we do see that emotionally sometimes there are deficiencies. We see it during the European parliamentary elections, for instance, which clearly do not hold the same importance as national elections. I think if I went around the room here and asked people who is your parliamentarian in Brussels, most people, including myself, would probably be very put into the corner and naming them. And I think, how do we make that connection? At the end of the day, we know the accusations that are being directed towards the European institutions by us Europeans, these faceless bureaucrats. They're detached, they are not being able to bring us all together. But at the end of the day, the diversity that we all rally around and appreciate is also, at the end of the day, of course, I don't want to call it a weakness, but it is a stumbling block, isn't it? What on paper does Bulgaria have in common with Sweden? What does Denmark have in common with Romania at the end of the day, if you look through it?
Yeah, I think that is a very interesting point. I mean, for one, we like to cherish that collection of identities and different audiences, and at the same time, I think in the last few years, it's more divided than ever, you know. And I think also that a lot of what you also said, like that it is also politically, of course. I mean, I think that there is a growing right-wing audience that is really not into Europe, you know, and so they really don't appreciate the values and how this works, and so that's why there is also the confusion in the past years.
Mm. Go ahead,
I would worry less about the right if the left or the center left or whatever you want to call people who aren't right were really behind the idea of Europe. Mm. And I simply don't see it. Mm-hmm. I'll give an example. I was invited by the Austrian Social Democrats, not the last European election, but the next to last European election, to talk about why one should care about Europe. And I was on a panel with someone who was, you know, social democratic activist, and he was out in the factories, and he said, well, how do I get people to come out to vote on a Sunday? Say I'm talking to electric workers, I tell them about how useful it is that we all have standard plugs. I'm sorry, that wouldn't get me out of bed on a Sunday morning. And one sees often when it's, you know, around election time, one sees, you know, various EU bureaucrats appealing to these kind of trivial instrumental values that, you know, Europe represents. I deeply believe that if people on the left, the liberal left, could stop, you know, es meckern auf hohem Niveau, yeah, you know, could stop doing that and take the idea of Europe seriously as the only place in the world, frankly, that has a chance of holding up not just social democratic values, but values of the Enlightenment, which are being threatened everywhere else. And as problematic as Europe is, do we want to look like Russia, China, Europe, India, Brazil, or I'm afraid to say the United States, which is in the middle of a cold civil war, and no one knows how it's going to look come November. You have a real threat to any kind of democratic values in the United States right now. Maybe just two ideas about how to do this. So one is, I'm going to make a plug for an organization that I'm on the board of. It's called Eurozine. You can get it for free. This is a group of more than 100 cultural journals from Poland to Portugal, which have been working for a good almost 20 years to create a European cultural public by translating into different languages, not only English, you know, interesting reports about sort of the cultural and political scene of countries that one normally wouldn't, as a European, have much access to. You know, people in Bulgaria tend to know more about what's happening in Russia or the United States than they do about what's happening in Poland normally. So this organization fills that gap. They're terribly underfunded, which is kind of crazy given that there's no one else that fills that role. But that's one place to look. Yeah, I have some other ideas, but maybe I'll give somebody else a chance for a second.
No, but Wolfgang, it's an important point, of course, because at the end of the day, as much as we like to talk about European cohesion and union, we are not the United States of Europe. Oftentimes it is being contrasted with the United States of America, which of course has an entirely different history and an entirely different concept. Yes, people in New York and Alabama might not have a lot in common, but at the end of the day, on July 4th, they will rally around the flag and celebrate Independence Day. This is, of course, which is lacking in Europe at the end of the day, as much as some progressive Europeans politicians are trying to push it. Now with the threat of more authoritarian tendencies within Europe, how concerned are you? How concerned are you that this sense of Europeanness, this togetherness, the solidarity, the cohesion, the understanding of being part of a team is slipping away?
I am concerned, for example, when I look at what happens in France in the next days and weeks, that makes me being concerned. And I don't have to look into other countries that are part of Europe to their political situation, which concerns me even more. So it's next door. It's next door. On the other hand, in a diabolic way, this war next door is of course something that rings the bell. And if we are Europeans, we should hear this bell, because if there is one thing that is the origin of the European, the younger European narration, then of course it's the war. It's the Second World War. It's the whole thing started to be interesting when the Europeans tended to understand it's not a good idea to go on with warfare within Europe. This is obviously killing too many people and killing our identity and breaking our political power, by the way. That was an understanding of the Europe. And then they tried to create something like Europe. And of course there was, from the beginning, the idea to make it a political union. Of course there was a search for European identity. Of course there was the idea to have a defense union in Europe, but all this more or less failed. So they said, oh, let's make it with economy, because it's okay for everybody, and we don't. And still, I mean, the core and the backbone of the European unification that is symbolized by the EEC is an economic one, and that's the mistake. That's the mistake. If we do not understand that we have to start from scratch in rebuilding the idea of Europe, we will fail again. But the war is definitely the loudest bell that can ring to remind Europe it's time and it's now, and it's a must-have. It's not a nice-to-have.
Erik, would you agree that this war, as tragic, brutal, and depressing as it is the wake-up call, as Wolfgang put it, that Europe perhaps needed in order to use Susan's words, to appreciate what we have here on this continent, to be Europe, to the peace that we've been enjoying for over 7 decades? And do you think it will trigger, that it will be an impetus now for us to, for lack of a better term, to use the American analogy, to grow up and become adults again and cherish and protect what we have?
Yeah, I think that's kind of obvious in a way. I think so, but I mean, but there's also something like I mean, I can only. I was thinking about that recently, like that. I mean, in the past wars in former Yugoslavia, in Syria, and I mean, this is in that way closer to us. But I think also it has in the media. There's also something changed. Eh? So, I mean, we came from 2 years pandemic, and from one day to the other, when the war happened in Ukraine, there was nothing in the news on the pandemic anymore. So it's rapidly also. Yeah, the media works totally different in the past few years. It goes much faster, and I mean, I'm not an expert in that, but you see it happening, and of course, I mean, yeah, like it's also overwhelming how quickly, of course, there was help and sympathy for what happened in Ukraine, you know. But I also saw that, I mean, friends of my kids, they also went to a rally, to a demonstration in Amsterdam. They had like yellow and blue flags on their face, and they went there. But later, when they came back home, I asked them. They didn't even know where Ukraine was situated in on the map, you know. Like so there's. Yeah, like the media plays also a very big role in that, I think, and also, yeah, for instance, also what Wolfgang is saying in France. I mean, Macron was a few weeks ago still very high up, and now by the inflation and immediately there's a reaction, and immediately there's a result of that. So. I mean, it is so rapidly changing nowadays, but I don't know what you think about that.
Susan, interesting enough, the war aside, Europe has been, and the European Union in particular, has been for the better part of the last decade in a constant crisis mode. We've had the Euro crisis, we've had the refugee crisis, for lack of a better term. We've had COVID, of course, where it took the countries quite a long time to come up with the cohesive plan. And yet, Europe still seems attractive enough for many countries still wanting to join. We have, of course, Ukraine aside, we have Georgia, we have Serbia, we have, most of the Balkan states. They do want to be still part of this project called the European Union, despite the difficulties and the bickering of the better part of the last decade. How do you explain this?
Once again, we are still better off than any place in the world I know. The Einstein Forum has an annual fellowship where we invite a young person from somewhere to live in Einstein's house and work on an independent project. And this past year we had a wonderful young man from India who had never left India and said it changed his life, but he came up with the idea of a program. I don't know who would fund it. He said, I would just simply like to send Germans for half a year to India and see, let them see what life is like with all of the things that they have here and, don't take seriously. Again, if you didn't grow up in Europe, it can look like a fairy tale. But I wanted to say something else, because I do think, just possibly, I'm not a Hegelian, but this might be the, Hegelian List der Vernunft, that out of the war, something good might come, as Wolfgang suggested. What's moving people right now is not simply, the sympathy and the sorrow for people whose homes and relatives are being bombed. We are being moved by the courage of Ukrainians, because no one expected them to last this long. No one expected them to fight this hard. No one expected Zelensky to be such an incredible rallier of his people. What we're talking about is a kind of heroism that Europeans are very embarrassed to talk about normally, right? I mean, they've seen, understandably, all of the things that can go wrong with heroism, and so it's a kind of, aura, or the kind of framework that makes people incredibly nervous here. And yet we're all moved by it, by finally seeing it. And my hope is just simply that European media and European politicians get rid of their fear of heroism, inspiration, and kitsch. Europeans are very quickly to dismiss anything that appeals to the emotions as kitsch. And take this moment as a time for saying, this is what we stand for, and there are people risking their lives to stand for the same thing right next door. I mean, I agree with what Wolfgang said before about the economic basis of the community. By and large, people promoting the EU, insofar as they do so, go for the lowest common denominator. Just look at the Euros. They couldn't agree on anything but bridges. And I sort of get the idea that bridges were supposed to be a symbolism, but they don't move anybody. You have to look at the notes for a very long time to understand what they were. You could have had, I don't know, Shakespeare, Goethe, Leonardo. I mean, you could have taken people. You could have done all kinds of European figures. It's not what they did, because people were worried, first of all, about controversy, and secondly, about kitsch. And if we take this moment not to worry, we just might have a chance to turn something horrible into something good.
And that's something, of course, we all hope for. We're in the final stretches, last few minutes here of this panel. Wolfgang, this EuropaCamp is under the motto, facing new realities, freedom and democracy under peril. Facing new realities, of course, is what we're doing in the 21st century. Somebody described Europe as a vegan amidst of meat eaters, implying that Europe has become soft. Europe has to watch out with all the soft power that we are enjoying and that Susan, of course, so eloquently described, this is still a tough world out there with people like Putin and so on and so forth who don't play by the rules that we set forth. Do you think, how optimistic are you, how hopeful are you that Europe will manage to remain relevant in the 21st century, that we do face these new realities and threats that we're facing on a daily basis and that seem to be increasing as we go along?
Since the speech of Erik Kessels, I'm very optimistic. Because that's basically our perspective, that's our chance. If we stay open, if we stay creative, if we stay if we keep also our reactivity, if we accept our variety, if we accept also the shit we are coming from, if we accept that there is a lot of dead bodies in our cellar, if we accept that we have a history and that we cannot extinguish this history but make it part of our awareness to what is coming, then I'm optimistic, and like Mrs. Merkel always said, there is no alternative.
Alternativlos, trying to find Europe's identity, searching for a European public. I think this very fascinating discussion here in the previous 75 minutes, kicked off by this wonderful keynote by Erik, very much illustrated and showed in many facets what Europe can be, what Europe should be, but also, of course, the dangers and risks that we are facing here on this continent increasingly as we move along. I cannot thank Erik Kessels enough for kicking off this panel with this lighthearted illustration of what a European identity and public sphere can and ought to look like. Thank you so much, Susan Neiman, of course, for being with us and giving us the insider-outsider perspective of an American who has adopted the European identity and is probably more appreciative of it than perhaps the average European out there. And of course, Wolfgang Bergmann for the wonderful and important work that ARTE is doing on a daily basis to creating that European public sphere, even though sometimes the challenges are very real. Thank you so much. It was wonderful listening to all of you, learning from you. This is your applause. Thank you so much.